I've had this Quad Cortex for about a month now, and I've spent quite a bit of time on it to really integrate it into my setup and to see if it works out for my purposes. So I just wanted to do a quick rundown of my thoughts about it, especially as a Chapman Stick player, which I know is a niche market, but just kind of give you my overall ideas about it, what I think, the pros and cons, and also some of the ways in which I set it up to automate some of the changes, specifically for this, the scene changes. Just because in the performance I have too many things going on, so I like to automate some of those changes and how I personally do that inside Logic Pro. So my background with this is that I've been playing Chapman Stick for 32 years, and for most of that, I've been either on a Roland or a Boss processor, and that's been simply because I utilized their GK setup, their guitar synth stuff, and their modeling and everything, their individualized pickups, and so that's been from, I think, the second Chapman Stick I had a GK2 pickup on the melody side, and then after that it became on both sides. And then a few years ago when I switched over fully to this SG12, which is a smaller version of the Chapman Stick, I also have another one that has those pickups on both sides of it. And so my most recent setup was two Boss SY1000s, and there's a lot to be desired about that, and there's a lot to be liked about it. And for me, it's been a really integral part of my sound to be able to do some modeling and some of the synth stuff. There's a couple of reasons why I started gravitating towards this. One is that, unfortunately, Stick Enterprises no longer makes the custom pickups that allow the installation of those on this instrument. But secondly, it's also just because at some point, having two processors and having this really complicated setup starts getting in the way of your creativity and all that stuff. And so really, for me, it was a matter of, is that extra stuff that it's given me worth it? And so I really wanted to experiment with this and see what I think about it. And for me, the transition is complete. I've switched over to this. And so there's things that I really like about it. There's some things not so much. But in general, one of the big things, especially as a Chapman Stick player, is that because I have different routing options to be able to run different effects on each side of the instrument without having two different processors. That's a big part of it. The second thing is to be able to then combine some of those. So if I want to have a single reverb effect that's affecting both sides, so it still sounds like one cohesive instrument, but to be able to add effects to one side or the other, I can still do that. The other thing, which for me is fairly new, is actually using distortion. I've used guitar synth stuff and modeling stuff quite a bit, but really no distortion. So that's new to me, and for those components, this has been great. The other part is that even though the Boss stuff has really great editors, this to me is more intuitive in that regard, and also it makes this display worthwhile. With the other ones, I would just have them on the ground, and I would only edit them on the editors. With this, I actually have it up here because I oftentimes, because of the touch screen and because of how intuitive it is, we'll just use this to be able to edit and kind of go back and forth between this. So that part's also been great. The modeling stuff sounds great. It's a little bit different on the Chapman Stick. I don't have as much sustain as a guitar player does, just because of the tapping nature of the instrument. But in that regard, it's still been great. And getting into distortion for me has been actually quite a bit of fun. The things where I think it lacks, for me personally, I don't think it has the greatest reverb and delay, which for me is not a big deal because I oftentimes, I run main stage as part of my live setup. And so at the end of my chain, I oftentimes use my favorite reverb and delay anyway, which is oftentimes the Valhalla DSP stuff. And oftentimes now it's actually Logic's internal stuff because their reverbs and delays just keep getting incrementally better and better. And oftentimes sound better. For me, it definitely sounds better than this, but it's really, I don't think there's anything you cannot achieve on this. That's just a matter of personal preference. So that part's been great as well. So overall, it's been a very positive experience. I've only had it for a month, so I don't know about the durability of it, but so far it's been pretty great. And to be able to also have a community where people are creating sound for this thing and to be able to experiment with them and do that stuff has been a lot of fun too. The way I have this set up, especially because of doing some of the automated changes, is that I learned pretty early on with this that I'm using, instead of presets, I'm using scenes within a preset to be able to change. And there's tons of videos about this, but the main reason is that if you're changing presets within one specific song, you're going to have dropout and you're not going to have a smooth transition. Where with the scenes, when you're able to change different scenes and turn on and off amps, effects, whatever it is, at that point, it's a smooth transition. So that part of it, I've basically set up where the program changes, and I'll show that on Logic as well. But the scene changes here start at, if I remember correctly, CC35, continuous control 35, and they're assigned. You have 8 different scenes where you can do that. So oftentimes for me, for this, let's say I have a clean sound for the first scene. And then for the main melody, I want it to be a little bit cleaner, less effects. And then for the solo section, adding a distortion to it. And that part, the distortion part for me, especially kind of being new to it, has been a lot of fun, just because it really, you have so many options as far as amps and neural captures and everything that that part's been a joy. And that's one of the reasons I decided to hold on to it. I never really thought about using distortion. Even now on some of the newer songs, I'm starting to use distortion on the bass side of my instrument as well. So anyway, that's my overall impression of it. I think it's a pretty well-built device. I think the editor is very intuitive. The unit itself is very intuitive. And even though I'm only a month in, for me, this is a pretty big transition from a lot of the Roland modeling and synth stuff. So, at some point, when the setup is too complicated, it can do infinite things, but it also can get in the way of writing music and being creative and doing that stuff. So that was one of the other reasons I switched over to this, where, I definitely miss some of the modeling stuff, especially the acoustic stuff and some of the synths, and maybe that'll at some point creep back into my setup. But it is still, I know it's relative, but it's a simpler setup for me. And I think overall it's a well-made device, and it seems like they do pretty regular updates and add a lot of features and different things. To wrap things up, I'm just going to do a section of one of my songs called Haumia, where I'm utilizing the distortion on this, and just so you kind of get an idea of how I have it set up in my live setup, especially with electronic music, and how I have the scene changes bringing in the distortion, and to be able to play it through a live performance. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye.